Hi everybody. I'm taking a little bit of a different approach to beekeeping, but I think it's just as important for beekeepers to stay up on research and learn as much as they can about the honeybee and the hive. So today I'm talking about suggested works for you at home. So if you want some suggestions on reading material over the winter, stay tuned. Today I'm going to talk about some research material. So it's in the fall and the winter when you don't have much to do outside. One of the things you can do is beef up on your material. So I've been beekeeping for more than 20 years, and I still, every year I buy new books. I still research material. I look at old material. I do these things just to keep me up on things that I may have forgotten or overlooked or things of that nature. I'm going to give you some pluses and minuses in the research material area today. So among all the books that you can buy, there are two giants in the field. So I want to focus on those two first, because if you don't have both of these books, you really are at a disadvantage in beekeeping. So I have here, I'm going to toss this one to the side for a second. I have here The Hive and the Honeybee, two versions of it. And I have the ABC and XYZ Bee Culture, also two versions of it. So this is the newest edition of each of these. Both of these books are extremely old. Depending on when you look at when they were made. On the back of the ABC and XYZ Bee Culture, the newest edition, it tells you that in 1877, A.I. Root wrote and published the first edition of this work. 1877. The Hive and the Honeybee was first published by Dadant, I believe in 1889. So you could say that this is older than this. The thing is that if you also count that originally this was published by L.L. Langstroth. It was called Langstroth on the Hive and the Honeybee, a Beekeeper's Manual, and it was first published in 1853. So this contains material that is some of the oldest that you can obtain. Of course, they've gone through many revisions. This is the 41st edition of the ABC and XYZ Bee Culture. This edition of the Hive and the Honeybee came out in 2015, and I'm shooting this in November of 2015, so it's less than a year old. This has been out for a few years, the 41st edition. This here is the ABC and XYZ Bee Culture. This is actually the 40th edition, and it was published in 1990. This is also an older version of The Hive and the Honeybee. This is the first book I got when I got into beekeeping. And it's proven to be these are the two best books you can get on beekeeping. They contain almost everything that you really need to know to successfully be a beekeeper. This one was published in 1975. So, let's go into each individual book, just a quick overview of each individual book, and then we'll get into some others that are available for you. Okay, the ABC and XYZ of Bee Culture, 41st edition, 40th edition. So I have the two last editions, and this was actually one that was given to me around 1993. So what is good about these books? Well, the best thing is it's basically an encyclopedia. So if you want to look up robbing behavior or diseases of the honeybees, you just look under R or D. It's extremely easy to look up subjects. Now, there is some, if you want to look up, say for instance, demarraying, which is a swarm control measure. Let's see if it has it in here under demarraying. So under demarraying or demarray method of swarm control, it tells you to see swarming in honeybees, demarraying. And it has a lot of things like that. Now, what's different about these two editions? You can see the size difference. Well, in this edition, for one thing, there's updated photos, color photos mostly, but updated illustrations, charts, things of that nature. One of the biggest differences in any new edition of any book is going to be the pest advice, the research that has come out about varroa mites, or Israeli bee paralysis virus, or whatever. So it's going to update your disease and pest management techniques and the science behind those, what we know about those diseases and pests. The new edition also covers a lot of new families that have been influential in beekeeping. So those are the two main big differences. Updated research on certain subjects is certainly in there. A lot of it is kind of the same as written by here. ABC and XYZ of Bee Culture is written by, and I think it's still published by, the Root family, Root Publications. You can read about AI Root in there, or in a lot of different beekeeping books. When I first became a beekeeper, AI Root actually sold beekeeping equipment. It was excellent equipment. They've since gone to just publications. So speaking of ABC and XYZ, they also publish a monthly magazine called Bee Culture. It used to be called Gleanings in Bee Culture. So this was actually, this is one of my favorite magazines on beekeeping. I think it's important for you to keep up on current events. Bee Culture is more of a publication geared towards practical type beekeeping. So that is the ABC and XYZ of Bee Culture. It's fairly costly. I believe this is $60 now. So it's the most costly of the books I'm going to show you. Older editions are just as good. In fact, I would recommend some versions that were published in the 60s. I'm not sure exactly which editions because I loaned it out and never got it back. But it actually had, I think the advice in the older editions was more impartial. So the newer editions have articles written by one, Roger Morse, who published this, with the Root Company. But it also has a lot of articles, or a lot of articles in here are written by authors in Bee Culture magazine. So whenever you read on a subject, anything, whether it's robbing or swarm control or anything, any subject in beekeeping, Carniolans, Italians, read multiple sources because you'll get a little different feel with each reading. And then with your experience, you can kind of weed out the stuff that's not so accurate. Okay, the next big item that should be in your library is the Hive and the Honeybee. I would pretty much recommend this over any other book on beekeeping. It's large. It reads like a book, so you can read it from front to back, unlike the ABC and XYZ of Bee Culture, which is meant just kind of to reference certain subjects quickly, which is very helpful. When you have a problem, finding out what that problem is sometimes is necessary by first going to something like the encyclopedia, the ABC and XYZ of Beekeeping. And then expand your knowledge with the Hive and the Honeybee. This is published by Dadant and Sons, has been since 1889, I believe. So it's been around for a very long time, had a lot of revisions, but is still very solid advice on beekeeping. Probably the most solid you'll find. Dadant and Sons, as you know, you may well know, also publishes the American Bee Journal. The American Bee Journal is the best journal to keep up on current events. There is a lot of scientific articles in the American Bee Journal. It's getting to the point now where it almost reads like a peer-reviewed journal. Not quite, but it's getting there. And as expected, a lot of the authors, co-authors in the American Bee Journal have contributed to the latest edition, this is the 2015 edition of the Hive and the Honeybee. But it reads like a book. It's solid, very solid advice on beekeeping. So the Hive and the Honeybee is probably the premier book on beekeeping. It has been for over a century, and probably will continue to be, because they devote a lot of their resources into this publication. Not to mention the fact that the American Bee Journal is probably one of the biggest bee journals in the world, certainly in the United States. So the Hive and the Honeybee is another book that you must have in your library. When something does go wrong with your hives, YouTube videos are nice to show you examples of certain things, but if you don't know what's going wrong in the first place, or if you're not sure, do some research on the Hive and the Honeybee and the ABC and XYZ of Bee Culture. Those are the two premier books that you need to have in your library. Another book that should be in your library is the Beekeeper's Handbook. This is a very practical handbook for beekeeping. This version here was updated in 2011, so we're looking at being about 5 years behind on pest management techniques, things of that nature, or new pests. Also, some of the information in here is somewhat outdated. Maybe we thought we knew something about a varroa mite in 2011 that we've since learned is not the case, something like that. But other than that, it's an excellent book. It really is. And if any book that you buy, the newest updated version is going to be the one that you want to refer to when you're talking about diseases and pests. So the Beekeeper's Handbook is kind of just like the Hive and the Honeybee, but it's more practical and easier to read. It also has some pretty cool illustrations and things of that nature. So, and all these books you can pretty much find on any beekeeping bee supply company website or whatever. And I would, unless there's a significant, for example, the ABC and XYZ of bee culture, it's going to be $59.95 almost anywhere you go unless you buy it used. So if you're going to buy it, I would hope that you would buy it from a bee supply company to prop up their business. Buying it from Amazon for the same price as buying it from Dadent is in my opinion just a bad move. There's a lot of good things that Amazon has out there, and you can't beat the price. But if it's the same price, try to support some of your local or just national bee supply companies. Another book that I think that should be in every beekeeper's library is by Ross Conrad. Now he does write for Bee Culture magazine. This book on natural beekeeping, it's called Natural Beekeeping: Organic Approaches to Modern Apiculture. Ross Conrad, forward by Gary Paul Naban, if I'm pronouncing that right. This is, in my opinion, the premier book on natural beekeeping. And what he does is go over techniques that would differ in nature to say, treating with Apistan. None of us like to treat with hard chemicals on our beehives, especially with our current knowledge. He gives you alternatives. And of course, this book was published a while back as well. It's listed for $35 by Chelsea Green Publishing. This is a 2007 edition. I don't know if there is a new edition or not. But when I read, it's delightful reading, really. It's easy to read, and he gives extremely practical advice to the common beekeeper. So he focuses on things to rid or minimize the damage done by diseases and pests in your hive using integrated pest management or IPM techniques and soft chemicals, and discusses the ramifications, if you will, of using hard chemicals in your hive, things of that nature. It's very practical, very good reading. I would say that the first 4 books that I've covered so far are things that should be absolutely in every beekeeper's library if they're serious about beekeeping. Okay, now I'll go on to a few books that are popular and I think are good reading, but not necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily recommend them as an absolute vital component of your beekeeping library. The Beekeeper's Bible here is filled with fantastic, absolutely fantastic imagery. It really is some of the best in any beekeeping book there is. Well, I think where it falls short, it discusses at length the history of the honeybee or human beings' relationship with the honeybee. It discusses that at length, and it does an absolutely fantastic job. Where it falls short is that although it does give you advice on practical beekeeping, it discusses more things like the history of the honeybee, humans in a relationship with the honeybee, honey. It gives you good descriptions on honey and beeswax, and there are, I believe, some recipes in here, things of that nature. Where it falls short is in the actual beekeeping, on beekeeping methods. However, it gives you, I'm looking at it right now, it gives you how to use beeswax for furniture polish, things like that nature. Things that I've never seen really in any book that was just in a general sense written for the beekeeper. That's more specific to a beeswax book rather than something like the Beekeeper's Bible. So this also is not extremely cheap. The Wisdom of the Hive by Thomas D. Seeley. This is if you are a scientifically minded beekeeper or a very numbers kind of guy, this book is a good addition to your library. Tom Seeley is a scientist and does some very interesting and accurate measurements of different things in the hive. The Wisdom of the Hive discusses, as it says on the beginning, on the front page, the cover, the social physiology of the honeybee colony. So he goes at length in studying and reporting on studies that he didn't actually take part in, but that he read on how bees socialize, with, how they communicate with each other. He doesn't go into length about things that have been studied before, say like Carl von Frisch's book. But for the scientifically minded, the ones that want to learn the intricacies of a hive of bees, how bees communicate and how they socialize with each other, how they determine who does what and when, all of that, this is an excellent book. This is a very new book. In fact, when I bought it, it wasn't even available to ship. So this is one you may not have seen. But if you're interested in bees in general, so you go to your flowers in the summertime and you see your honeybees working some flowers, and then you see a little green tiny bee or a little black and white striped tiny bee, carpenter bee or mason bee or some other type of bee, and you're curious about it, this is an excellent book for that. This is the bees in your backyard, and it goes over thousands. It looks to me like hundreds or thousands of different types of bees. It spins, and it's wonderfully illustrated. It is fantastic. I haven't read this book at all. I've just kind of flipped through it. It gives you identification tips. It's on each kind of family of bee, and teaches you very well how to tell one bee from another, and at least to some extent it gives you a pretty good background on that bee. In fact, it even shows you how to identify their nests. So this is, so far, like I said, I haven't read this book yet. I just got it, I think, 2 days ago. But it is a very promising book to me in explaining the different kind of bees that I see in my backyard. That's why it's called The Bees in Your Backyard. Definitely recommend it. Since I got a copy of it, I know you can too. But like I said, it must have been published, or released, I should say, in November of 2015. Okay, this is The Dancing Bees by Carl von Frisch. For those of you that don't know, Carl von Frisch is the scientist who demystified bee communication, at least mainly centered around the waggle dance, but he also identified other dances. This is a classic. I've had this book since I was like 7 years old. The price on it says $3.25. I don't know what it would go for nowadays, but I'm sure you can get it for relatively few dollars. Anyway, it's a delight to read. Of course, we've learned things since this book was published. I mean, Carl von Frisch was born in the 1880s, 1889 maybe, something like that. I think he died in the 1980s, so he lived to almost be 100 years old. And his work has been revered by scientists worldwide for decades. So I would definitely recommend The Dancing Bees. If not for anything else, just to read about his experiments and how he came up with what he did learn about bees. At the time of publication, by the way, this was viewed with much skepticism. Of course, now we know that he did interpret the honeybee dance and dances as well as he could at the time. So it's a delight to read, it really is. Okay, the last one I want to talk about is I think it's a fairly new book called The Honey Connoisseur. I know it's been out for a year or two, at least. It's been out since 2013. It was published in 2013. I've read the book, and there's a lot of good things about the book. It was written by C. Marina Marchese, hope I'm pronouncing that right, and Kim Flodham. Kim Flodham, as many may know, is the editor of Bee Culture magazine. It's a good book, and it does in great detail go into what honey is, for example, what it's made up of, why it granulates, things of that nature. It has a wonderful chapter on honey plants with nice drawings and pictures, and so forth, and information on individual honey plants. It also has some recipes, I think, in the back, simple honey recipes. Where it falls short is in exactly what the title suggests, the honey connoisseur. And I'm going to just give you an example. Now, I think it's worth reading and worth buying. Don't get me wrong. It also, by the way, does a good job of explaining the recent adulteration of honey that we've had going on. It also has a chapter on pairing honey with different foods. Now, here is there are things in here that describe honey that I would never use to describe honey. For example, it said that under the glossary of honey tasting terms, it says one of them can be gamey, which is sweat, manure, barnyard, stable, leather, cheese, gym bag, fresh fish, cat urine, daisy, and dandelion. I've never tasted any honey that reminded me in any way of manure or cat urine or barnyard. Also chemical, medicine, plastic, turpentine, cardboard, soap, petrochemical, metal, cabbage, sulfur, ash, tar, tobacco. Never had anything like that. Spoiled, well, if a honey's spoiled, then it's spoiled, but I would have used certainly different terms to describe almost every honey that I've ever tasted. And just so you know, when I travel, I do pick up honey from wherever I travel, whether it's in the States or it's abroad, although I've only done that in Mexico. And the honey there was quite different. There were stingless bees in Mexico. But in short, I would never describe honey in such terms. I don't know where those terms came from, and I don't agree with them at all. But it does give you, what I think it does give you is kind of a strategy to taste honeys and try to describe what you're tasting. Just don't use those words. Anyway, that was the last book that I wanted to cover. So anyway, I hope you found this useful at all. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.